Welcome to tonight's story. What began as a cultural exchange became a descent into steel, water, and fire beneath New York's skin. Ethan Cole and his alien companions didn't come to conquer Earth. They came to understand it. But when a hidden defense grid mistook curiosity for contamination, survival replaced sightseeing. Flooded tunnels, sterilizer gas, collapsing doors. Every breath became a choice. Stay with us as chaos tests what it means to be human. Metal screamed as the disguised shuttle bucked through the upper atmosphere, its stealth skin peeling into burning ribbons. Ethan Cole jerked awake against the harness, tasting smoke and copper, while alarms stuttered in mismatched languages. Professor Crix Vantara clung to a sparking console, tentacles slapping dead controls. Lyrix's crystalline chest pulsed a sick blue, throwing fractured light across Thalan's wilting leaves and Morb's shivering, half-formed limbs. A proximity siren rose, then cut into a cold synthetic verdict. Unknown signature. Containment protocol active. The floor tilted. Gravity fluttered like a dying heartbeat. Through a cracked viewport, Manhattan's night grid flared beneath them, impossibly calm. Ethan forced air into his lungs, slapped an emergency filter over his mouth, and shouted for everyone to brace. The ship hit something solid, and the world became impact. In the red emergency glow, he saw Lyrix crack, Thalan collapse, and Crix whisper, smiling. Survival shows the truth. The cabin settled into a crooked silence, broken only by the hiss of ruptured lines and the ticking pulse of failing systems. Red emergency strips painted everything in bloodlight. Ethan tore free of his harness and crawled across twisted flooring toward Professor Crix Vantara, who was pinned beneath a warped support rail. Sparks crawled along exposed wiring, scorching the professor's skin. Crix's eye stalk swiveled with sharp, lucid focus despite the pain. "Do not waste breath on panic," he rasped, voice trembling. "A species reveals itself when survival strips away comfort." Ethan wedged his shoulder under the rail and lifted just enough for Crix to slide clear. Behind them, Lyrix's fractured facets dimmed. Thalan's leaves curled inward, and Morb trembled near involuntary division. A cracked display flickered to life. Oxygen scrubber 004112. The countdown glowed mercilessly. Ethan stared at it, then at his companions. Survival was no longer theory. It was choice. The wrecked shuttle lay embedded in concrete and rusted beams. Its hull split like a crushed insect. Damp air seeped through fractures, carrying the sour scent of stagnant water and oil. Ethan sealed the breached compartment with a manual override, locking the dying craft behind them. "Portable scrubbers, now," he ordered, ripping emergency filters from the wall. Lyrix dimmed his glow to a steady lantern pulse, illuminating a warped maintenance hatch half buried in debris. Thalan pressed trembling leaves to the wall, whispering of distant human thought noise above. Morb sagged, struggling to maintain a stable form in the thin, tainted air. Crix attempted to protest. Protocol. Contamination. But Ethan cut him off with a look. Oxygen ticked down in harsh digital silence. There would be no debate. He forced the hatch open, revealing a narrow tunnel sloping into blackness. Cold water lapped at his boots as he stepped forward. Above, the city lived. Below, they ran out of breath. They had gone less than 50 meters when the first drone rolled from the dark. Wheels slicing through shallow water without sound. Its cylindrical body pivoted, lens dilating as it scanned Lyric's crystalline glow. Morb's unstable mass, Thalen's sagging leaves. A red indicator flared. The nozzle beneath its chassis hissed, releasing a fine mist that burned the air with sterile sharpness. Thalen recoiled, leaves blackening at the edges. Morb's surface bubbled where droplets landed. "Down!" Ethan shouted, shoving Crix behind a support column. Lyric stepped forward despite visible fractures, facets flaring bright as he absorbed part of the spray, redirecting current into the flooded floor. Ethan lunged, ripping a rusted pipe from the wall and smashing it against the drone's lens. Glass shattered. The machine shrieked a digital alarm that echoed through the tunnel like a predator's cry. More whirring responded in the distance. The Undercity had marked them. The tunnel ahead ended at a dead junction box, half submerged in foul water. Cables dangling like broken veins. Beyond it, a slanted corridor promised higher ground and thinner air. "We need power," Ethan said. Already prying the rusted panel open, Crix warned of overloads, harmonizers, cascading faults. But Lyric's moved closer without hesitation. Hairline fractures webbed his crystalline arm as he placed a facet against exposed wiring. Current surged through him in blinding white veins, casting wild shadows across concrete. The box sputtered, then hummed alive. A green indicator flickered. The corridor lights trembled into existence. Lyric's glow faltered, dimming a shade too far. A shard chipped from his wrist and fell, tinkling into black water. Ethan caught his shoulder as the crystalline alien swayed. "You're not a generator," Ethan muttered, guilt thick in his throat. Lyric's answered softly, voice chiming through fractures. "I am functional." The word sounded fragile as they climbed toward drier tunnels. Thalen stiffened, leaves trembling as if struck by invisible rain. "Voices," he whispered, though no human sound reached Ethan's ears. The closer they moved to the surface, the louder the storm inside Thalen's mind became, fleeting human thoughts bleeding downward through concrete, irritation, hunger, laughter, fear. The flood hit him hard. He staggered, clutching the wall as his broadcast flickered dangerously outward. Above them, somewhere distant, a murmur of unease rippled through commuters who could not name its source. Ethan grabbed Thalen's shoulders. "Focus. Find patterns." Thalen forced his consciousness into narrow channels, sorting chaos into direction. North, uniforms, tension, west, quiet fatigue, old pipes. Ethan chose west without hesitation. Behind them, drones echoed closer, guided by sterile logic. Ahead, human exhaustion created a blind corridor. Thalen walked on, carrying the weight of 1,000,000 minds like a burden he had never asked to bear. They found the elevator shaft at the end of a sloping corridor, its steel gate miraculously intact. A single amber indicator glowed beside the panel, steady and alive. Ethan felt hope surge, sharp and dangerous. "This could take us up," Crix breathed, eye stalks stretching toward the darkness above. Lyric's fed a thread of current into the controls. The gate shuddered, then slid open with a metallic groan. Clean air drifted from within, too crisp compared to the mildew rot outside. Ethan stepped forward, then stopped. The shaft walls were newer than the surrounding concrete, vents recently replaced, metal edges unscarred by rust. A faint click sounded overhead, soft, precise, mechanical, not abandoned, maintained. "Back," Ethan said, voice low. Crix frowned, confused. Another click answered, followed by a subtle hiss beginning above them. Ethan's pulse spiked. "Back, now!" The amber light flickered to sterile white. The vents exhaled without warning. A thin, invisible wave rolled down the shaft, turning the air sharp and metallic. Thalen gasped first, leaves curling inward as if scorched by frost. Crick staggered, tentacles blistering where the gas touched exposed skin. Lyrix's lattice began to vibrate at a dangerous pitch, light refracting in fractured patterns along widening cracks. Morb tried to seal the vent by stretching upward, but droplets condensed across his surface, hissing against gelatin. Ethan slammed the emergency panel, forcing the elevator doors apart with a rusted bar. "Out! Move!" he shouted, dragging Thalen back into the tunnel. The gas followed, seeping like a living thing. Filters from the scrubber pack were jammed into breathing ports. Ethan wrapped fabric over his own mouth, lungs burning. Crick's voice came ragged. "This is a purge!" Above them, machinery hummed with indifferent purpose. They were not intruders. They were contaminants. A low vibration traveled through the concrete. Subtle at first, then building into a steady mechanical pulse. Lyrix's dim glow flickered in warning. "External scan," he chimed weakly. Thalen, barely upright, whispered, "It tracks residue." Crick's eye stalks snapped toward the ceiling. "Our cloak signature remains embedded in the environment. The defense array is following it." As if summoned by the admission, a heavy bulkhead slammed shut ahead with bone-shaking force. Dust rained down. Another door sealed somewhere behind them, echoing like a hammer strike in a tomb. Ethan felt the tunnel shrinking, options collapsing. "They're hurting us," he muttered. Morb's surface rippled uncontrollably, edges threatening to split again under stress. The oxygen counter blinked harsher red. 001857. Above, New York pulsed with oblivious life. Below, the system that protected it tightened its grip. The machine did not hate them. It simply calculated removal. The next corridor dipped into black water that swallowed the light from Lyrix's fading glow. A torn power cable dangled into the flood, spitting blue arcs that snapped across the surface like hunting teeth. The air smelled of rust and ozone. Ethan tested the depth with a broken pipe. The tip sparked violently, sending a jolt up his arm. "We can't wade through that," Crick warned, voice thin. There was no alternate path. The oxygen timer glowed red against damp concrete. Lyrix stepped forward, fractures glinting. "I will ground it," he said softly. "No," Ethan began, but Lyrix had already pressed a crystalline palm to the cable. Electricity surged into him, white veins crawling beneath translucent facets. The water stilled, safe for a heartbeat. Lyrix staggered, another shard splintering free. Ethan caught him before he fell. "Move," Ethan ordered, forcing himself not to look back. Morb faltered halfway across the corridor, his gelatinous mass trembling in uneven pulses. A second nucleus bulged beneath his surface like a shadow trying to be born. "I am dividing," he gurgled, voice fractured by strain. The thin air and chemical residue were pushing his biology beyond control. Crick cursed softly, explaining that incomplete mitosis would leave both halves too weak to survive. Ethan dropped to his knees, pressing a thermal stabilizer patch against Morb's core while wrapping him tight with a compression band from the emergency kit. "Hold together," Ethan urged, palm steady despite shaking fingers. Morb's surface quivered violently, edges stretching, then contracting. For a terrible moment, the second form began to separate, translucent and fragile. Ethan tightened the band, forcing pressure inward. Slowly the bulge receded, reabsorbed into a single struggling mass. Morb sagged, exhausted. Survival was glue held by will alone. As they neared a busier artery above, Thailand froze mid-step, leaves flaring wide as if struck by invisible lightning. His telepathic field spiked without control. Ethan felt it as pressure in his skull. A sudden rush of alien panic. Too many minds. Thailand gasped. Surface thoughts cascaded downward. Anger, fatigue, hunger, fleeting joy, layered and deafening. The overload burst outward, somewhere above. Commuters shifted uneasily. A wave of unexplained dread rippling through a crowded platform. Ethan grabbed Thailand's shoulders and forced him against the cold wall. "Anchor on me," he ordered, locking eyes with the plant-born alien. One thought, one place. He pictured a quiet kitchen, sunlight on a wooden table, the smell of coffee. Thailand trembled, broadcast shrinking from storm to whisper. The distant unease faded. Crix watched with tight silence. Above, the city continued unaware. Below, Thailand sagged, nearly empty. Thailand steadied himself against damp concrete, eyes closed, mind reaching upward through layers of steel and stone. Brightest concentration, he murmured. Noise, many bodies, diffused attention. Ethan understood instantly. Times Square, chaos thick enough to hide in. Crix hesitated, citing exposure protocols, but the oxygen counter glowed crimson. 00-1234. There would be no sterile escape. They pushed toward the indicated corridor, boots splashing through shallow runoff. The air grew colder, thinner, carrying faint vibrations from traffic above. Then the Undercity answered with violence. A heavy blast door slammed down ahead, steel grinding against steel, sealing the direct path. Another thundered shut behind them. Dust cascaded from the ceiling. Ethan's pulse hammered. "They're narrowing the routes," Crix said tightly. The defense array was learning. The machine did not panic. It optimized. Ethan scanned the branching tunnels, calculating distance against breath. "Then we take the path it thinks is worst," he said. The final corridor narrowed into a choke point, and without warning, a blast door dropped from the ceiling with brutal speed. Ethan lunged forward, but the gap was already shrinking. Crix stumbled. Thailand sagged. Morb struggled to compress. Lyrics moved first. He hurled himself into the narrowing space, crystalline body wedging between steel and concrete. Light flared through his fractured lattice as he channeled current into the door's motor, trying to stall it. The mechanism screamed against overload, sparks raining like molten snow. "Go," Lyrics chimed, voice steady despite splintering edges. Ethan dragged Thailand and Morb through the opening, Crix scrambling behind. The door shuddered, then forced downward with unstoppable weight. Ethan turned in time to see Lyrics' body shatter in a cascade of glittering shards, light scattering across wet concrete before fading. The seal locked with a final metallic slam. Their lantern was gone. Darkness swallowed the tunnel whole, without Lyrics. The air felt heavier, closer, as if the walls leaned inward to listen. Ethan knelt where the blast door had sealed and gathered the largest remaining shard of crystal. It glowed faintly in his palm, a dying ember struggling against cold concrete. Morb emitted a low, broken gurgle. Thailand's leaves drooped to gray. Crix stood motionless, eye stalks lowered, authority burned away by loss. The oxygen counter blinked 00758 in merciless red. For a moment, no one moved. Above them, The city pulsed with life, unaware of the life extinguished beneath its feet. Crix finally spoke, voice stripped of certainty. Curiosity has a cost. Ethan closed his fingers around the glowing fragment. The light pressed against his skin like a heartbeat fading. Then we pay it forward, he said quietly, rising into darkness without their lantern. Ethan rose from the darkness with Lyrix's shard burning faintly in his fist. The oxygen counter pulsed red against wet concrete. We surface, he said. Crix recoiled instantly, invoking law, contamination, interstellar collapse. But Ethan cut him off. We're already condemned underground. He turned to Morb. Can you reform the municipal shell? Morb's gelatin trembled. Painful. Possible. Ethan nodded once. Do it. To Thalen, he said. No panic this time. Just indifference. Make them look away. Thalen's leaves quivered, exhausted yet willing. Crix stared at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time. You would use your own species as cover? Ethan met his gaze without flinching. Humans survive by blending chaos with kindness. The system can't model that. He glanced at the tunnel leading upward. We become noise inside noise. The choice tasted like betrayal, but it was breath. Crix tore open his research drive, its obsidian casing splitting under trembling tentacles. Data once meant for conferences and prestige flickered across the cracked interface. I can mimic a municipal maintenance authorization, he said. Voice raw. A temporary lie. Ethan didn't hesitate. Transmit. Morb reshaped around them, forming rigid compartments that hid Crix's weakened body and sealed leaking vents. His surface rippled in pain, but held. Thalen inhaled shallowly and let a thin wave of indifference seep upward through concrete, encouraging distraction instead of... Ethan monitored the oxygen counter, 0037, and forced steady breaths. Crix triggered the spoof. A coded pulse surged through buried cables, impersonating routine infrastructure diagnostics. For a heartbeat. The Undercity paused. Surveillance pings softened, rerouting away from their signature. Sweat ran down Ethan's spine, despite the cold. That bought seconds, Crix whispered. Seconds were enough to run. The rusted street grate loomed above like a final question. Through its narrow slats poured a spill of neon light and human noise, laughter, engines, music layered in chaotic harmony. Behind them, drones whined closer, guided by sterilized logic. Ethan wedged his shoulder under the grate and pushed. It refused. Morb surged forward, hardening his outer layer into a wedge. Crix channeled the last of the spoofed power into the corroded bolts. They snapped one by one with metallic cracks. Cold winter air knifed downward, slicing into Ethan's lungs so sharply he almost welcomed the pain. Thalen's faint broadcast spread upward like mist, blurring attention. 3, Ethan whispered. The drone's pitch sharpened. 2, Crix's pulse flickered unstable. 1, Ethan kicked hard. The grate burst open. Neon flooded the shaft. Survival stepped into light without permission. They emerged into Times Square like ghosts breaking surface. Neon screens blazed overhead, towering advertisements washing their faces in electric color. The cold hit Ethan first, slicing through damp clothing and burning his lungs clean. Crowds flowed in relentless currents, tourists pausing for photos, commuters weaving with practiced indifference. For a split second. Several heads turned toward the open grate. Morb compressed around Crix, forming a crude cargo compartment beneath a bulky municipal shell. Thailand released a subtle wave of indifference. Not control, just suggestion. Eyes drifted away. A drone hovered above the street, lens pivoting, recalibrating after the EMP shock. Ethan forced himself to walk instead of run, heart hammering against his ribs. The oxygen counter inside his sleeve blinked 00112. Police sirens wailed in the distance, closing in. The city did not know it was a battlefield. Ethan did. A drone dipped lower, its lens tightening on their cluster as if taste-testing the air. Thailand swayed, then pushed a fragile wave outward. It wasn't control, not truly, just a gentle smoothing of edges, a suggestion that nothing here required alarm. The effect rippled through the crowd. A heated argument dissolved into awkward laughter. A man mid-shout blinked and checked his phone instead. Someone began humming near a street vendor. The drone hesitated, algorithms confused by the absence of panic spikes. Ethan kept walking, shoulders squared, resisting the urge to glance upward. Morb's shell trembled. A seam opened along his side before sealing again. Thailand's leaves faded toward gray, the broadcast draining him rapidly. Almost done, Ethan murmured, though he had no proof. The oxygen counter blinked 0 hours, 0 minutes, 38 seconds, above neon glare and winter air. Serenity settled unnaturally over chaos. Drones recalibrated above the billboards, tightening formation as the calm field thinned. Crick staggered inside Morb's compartment, eyes blazing with a desperate clarity. "They are reacquiring," he rasped, without waiting for permission. He tore his research drive free and pressed it against a metal street pole. Data flickered once. Decades of study, leverage, ambition. Then he overcharged it. The pulse erupted outward in a silent shockwave. Screens blinked, advertisements stuttered, and drones spasmed mid-air before crashing into asphalt. A ring of startled gasps rose from nearby pedestrians, quickly dissolving into confused chatter. Cricks convulsed, nerves scorched by feedback, tentacles smoking faintly. Ethan caught him before he collapsed fully. "Why?" Ethan demanded. Cricks's voice trembled. "Because survival without conscience is extinction." The last of the oxygen counter blinked 0 hours, 0 minutes, 5 seconds as a distant beacon tone answered from orbit. With the drones fallen, the threat became human again. Police lights flashed red and blue across wet pavement. Sirens converging from multiple directions. Officers shouted commands as barricades began forming at the edges of the square. Ethan adjusted his pace, blending into the moving river of pedestrians. Morb reshaped around Cricks, thickening his outer shell into the dull geometry of municipal equipment, hiding alien contours beneath steel-like folds. Thailand's broadcast flickered weakly, just enough to blur suspicion into distraction. Breath tore through Ethan's chest. The oxygen counter had gone dark, but his lungs still burned from thin air. The defense array might have lost its eyes. Yet the city had many. Footsteps quickened behind them. A perimeter was tightening block by block. Ethan steered them toward a side street, calculating crowd flow like a current in floodwater. Survival demanded motion without panic. A tremor rolled through the pavement beneath their boots. Subtle, yet deliberate. Ethan felt it before he understood it. Manhole covers rattled. Vent grates hissed as unseen mechanisms shifted below. Cricks lifted his head weakly. "Reset cycle," he breathed. "The defense grid is sealing access points." 2 blocks ahead, a maintenance hatch slammed shut with metallic finality. Another door along the curb sealed with hydraulic force. The Undercity was closing its mouth. Officers tightened lines, unaware that the ground itself was aligning against escape. Thylon reached outward with fading telepathy and found a narrow maintenance shaft 3 streets west, forgotten by newer infrastructure. "There," he whispered. Morb's form wavered dangerously, a faint bulge hinting at renewed mitosis. Ethan forced them forward, weaving through traffic and startled pedestrians. Every second tightened the net. The world above and below conspired in silent coordination. They reached the hidden service shaft tucked behind a broken billboard frame, half swallowed by shadow. Ethan tore the corroded door open and found a vertical tunnel yawning downward, cold air rushing up like a warning. Police voices echoed faintly from the street. Morb's body trembled, a second nucleus pressing outward again under strain. Crick sagged, barely conscious. Thalen collapsed at the threshold, leaves gray and brittle. The beacon tone in Ethan's ear sharpened, clean and alien. "Extraction lock," he whispered. He clipped the tether hook to Morb's reinforced shell, then slung Thalen over his shoulder. The magnetic line shot down the shaft, snapping tight with violent force. The upward pull yanked them off their feet. Concrete scraped past in a blur as gravity surrendered. Below, the shaft mouth began sealing shut. Above, the night sky opened like a wound of stars. The tether hauled them upward with brutal acceleration, tearing cold air from Ethan's lungs as the shaft walls blurred past. Morb compressed tighter around Crick's, absorbing impacts as loose debris ricocheted in the narrowing tunnel. Thalen hung limp against Ethan's shoulder, faint warmth the only sign of life. Above, a dark silhouette eclipsed the stars, the cloaked Academy shuttle locking position for retrieval. The magnetic field snapped them into its belly with a metallic clang. In the same instant, a final tremor shook the shaft below. Concrete slabs slammed shut, like jaws sealing prey inside stone. Ethan caught a last glimpse of neon leaking into darkness before the hatch vanished completely. Then silence. Artificial gravity stabilized with a soft hum. The rescue bay lights flickered on, sterile and indifferent. Earth receded through the viewport, glowing whole and unaware. Ethan sagged against the bulkhead, breath ragged but alive. In the quiet of orbit, the chaos felt distant yet permanent. Ethan sat strapped to a bench in the recovery bay, hands cupped around Lyrix's surviving core fragment. It glowed faintly, casting a soft blue pulse across his bruised knuckles. Medical drones worked silently on Crix and Thalen nearby, their movements efficient and emotionless. Morb rested inside a stabilization field. Surface, finally, still. Through the viewport, Earth turned slowly, luminous and serene, offering no sign of the purge beneath its streets. Ethan pressed the shard against his forehead for a moment, feeling residual warmth seep into skin. Lyrix had been light in darkness, a battery, a shield, a friend. Now he was memory compressed into crystal. The shard flickered once, then steadied. Ethan's reflection hovered in the glass beyond. Tired, changed, unwilling to look away. Survival had demanded payment, and the receipt burned cold in his palm. Crix awoke beneath sterile light, tentacles wrapped in regeneration mesh, eyes dim but steady. Without ceremony, he requested access to the shuttle's main archive. Ethan watched as the professor's remaining data streams surfaced. Field notes, defense schematics, Earth's vulnerabilities mapped in meticulous detail, evidence that could have justified quarantine, retaliation, or conquest. Crix hesitated only a fraction of a second. Then he initiated total purge. Files collapsed into static, research decades long dissolving into null. The screen confirmed deletion across Academy servers. "You erased leverage," Ethan said quietly. Crix's voice rasped through healing tissue. "I erased temptation." Outside the viewport, Earth rotated peacefully, unaware of the calculus that had nearly defined it as hostile. Crix shut down the console and leaned back. Drained. Knowledge could dominate or protect. Today, he chose protection. The lie of superiority vanished into vacuum. Back at the Galactic Academy, the announcement rippled through lecture halls once devoted to sterile anthropology. Terran Studies was renamed Terran Survival. The curriculum no longer centered on cuisine, art, or cultural novelty. Instead, it dissected resilience metrics, decentralized infrastructure, emotional unpredictability under stress. Ethan stood at the rear of the chamber as holographic models replayed their underground escape, flooded corridors, collapsing seals, improvised deception. Students watched in stunned silence. Earth was no longer a curiosity. It was a case study in adaptive chaos. Crix, still scarred, addressed the assembly without flourish. "Humans do not dominate their world," he said. "They endure it." Lyrix's core fragment rested beside the podium. Faint blue light, a reminder of cost. The galaxy would visit again, but not as tourists. Preparation replaced fascination. Survival replaced spectacle. Ethan felt pride and weight in equal measure. In a sealed strategy chamber, a new list materialized above the table in cold white script. Area 51. Florida man. Twitter. Not curiosities. Risk vectors. Ethan studied the projections as simulations unfolded. Area 51, modeled as a nexus of secrecy reflexes and defensive escalation patterns. Florida man tagged as a stochastic anomaly cluster. Human unpredictability amplified by environment and impulse. Twitter mapped as a distributed emotional amplifier capable of igniting mass behavior within minutes. Crix's voice carried measured gravity. "These are not locations or platforms. They are stress tests." Morb, stabilized yet quieter, logged adaptive protocols for chaotic public spaces. Thylon calibrated low-impact empathic dampening fields for digital panic cascades. No conquest plans were drafted. Only containment. Only coexistence. Ethan added a final note to the board. Experience before judgment. The list pulsed once, then archived into doctrine. Ethan stood alone in the observation ring as Earth rotated beyond reinforced glass. Blue oceans veiled by thin swirls of cloud. The Academy hummed quietly behind him, engines steady, knowledge sanitized. In his palm rested Lyrix's shard, its glow now softer, sustained by a small stabilizer field. He lifted it toward the planet below. Breath had nearly failed beneath those streets. Chaos had nearly defined them as threat. Yet what endured was choice. Crix had erased advantage. Morb had held form through pain. Thylon had quieted a city without stealing its will. Ethan exhaled slowly, watching condensation fade against transparent alloy. Survival had not been triumph. It had been negotiation with fear, paid in light and certainty. The shard pulsed once, faint but present. Earth did not know what it had cost. The galaxy did. And still, it would return. In the end, no empire fell and no planet burned. What changed was quieter and deeper. Survival demanded sacrifice, restraint, and the courage to delete power instead of wield it. Earth was not judged by strength, but by resilience. This story reminds us that breath is earned, not guaranteed, and who we become under pressure defines us. If this journey moved you, follow the channel and join us for the next story among the stars.